I was running so late that I didn't even bother tying my trench coat. In my frantic dash to get out the door, I blindly grabbed what I thought was my phone off the kitchen island. By the time I squeezed onto the crowded morning subway, my husband's sister was already calling it. I didn't know it was his device yet. I just hit accept and answered. And the very first thing that came out of her mouth, well, it completely shattered my reality. I made up my mind before the train even reached the next stop. I was going to file for divorce first thing tomorrow. Let me back up. My morning had started at a brutal 6:45. I was flying blind, fueled entirely by anxiety and a stale almond croissant that I managed to take exactly one bite out of before tossing it into my leather tote. I work as an art curator, and my gallery was going after a massive private collection today. We were meeting the estate lawyers downtown. If I managed to land this acquisition, the entire team was getting a massive payout, and I would finally get bumped up to senior curator. I've spent the last 5 years doing the heavy lifting in the shadows while other people took all the credit. My name is Zinnia. I'm 31, and I've been married for 4 years. My husband, Julian, works as a structural engineer. If you asked our friends, they'd tell you our marriage was solid rock. We never threw plates, never had screaming matches loud enough for the neighbors to hear, never gave anyone a reason to gossip. For the longest time, I convinced myself that was the dream. A steady paycheck, a nice apartment, and a guy who reliably showed up for dinner. But a house can look perfectly fine from the sidewalk, while the foundation is quietly crumbling into dust. I stepped off the subway platform, shivering in the damp underground air, and reached into my bag to check my morning emails. I pulled the device out and pressed my thumb to the screen. It lit up, and my blood ran completely cold. The lock screen wasn't the moody shot of the rain against our balcony window that I always kept as my background. It was Julian, grinning like an absolute idiot at Fenway Park with a Red Sox cap shoved on his head. I let out a frustrated groan. We both had the exact same slate gray phones sitting in identical clear silicone cases. I'd mixed them up a handful of times before, but usually when we were just killing time on the couch watching Netflix, not when I was already sprinting 10 minutes behind schedule. I couldn't turn back now. Julian was working the afternoon shift at the firm today, so he didn't have to leave the apartment until noon. He'd find my phone on the counter and we'd just swap back when I got home. It really wasn't a big deal. By the time I reached the station, the subway was already screeching to a halt at the platform. I wedged myself in, pinning my shoulder against the rear doors. The Boston tea on a Monday morning is a special kind of miserable. The smell of wet wool coats, stale coffee breath, someone's aggressive floral perfume, and the mechanical screech of the tracks all slammed into my already throbbing skull. Right as the train plunged into the tunnel, the device vibrated against my palm. The screen flashed Alora, Julian's younger sister. I stared at it, hesitating. I normally avoided his family's calls like the plague, especially before 8 in the morning. But what if someone was in the hospital? Thinking it might be an actual emergency, I slid my thumb across the glass. Before I even breathed a hello, Alara was already talking a mile a minute. "Tell me you brought up the brownstone with Zinnia. Mom is losing her absolute mind over here waiting for an update. You keep stalling." My throat tightened. I couldn't make a sound. Assuming the signal was dropping in the tunnel, Alara just talked louder, her voice echoing sharply in my ear. "That place in Beacon Hill. Mom says you need to turn on the charm and get your name on that deed this week. If you wait too long and she decides to sell it on her own, we're totally screwed. The market is insane right now. We sell it, take the cash, and put a down payment on that massive colonial in Wellesley. Mom co-signs with you just to be safe. I get to build my Pilates studio in the guest house, and Mom moves in with you guys to help run the place." I stood perfectly paralyzed as the train rattled through the dark. The fingers gripping the phone turned to ice. That Beacon Hill brownstone wasn't just some random real estate asset. My mother bought it for me right before the cancer finally won. It was tiny, barely a 1-bedroom with drafty windows on a quiet brick-paved street. but it was mine. More importantly, it was the only tangible piece of her I had left in the world. During her final weeks at the hospice, she gripped my hand so hard her knuckles turned white, making me swear to her over and over, "Zinnia, listen to me. A woman can love her husband. She can be good to his family. But that house stays in your name only. It is your ripcord. If everything goes wrong and you find yourself with nobody left, you will always have a floor to sleep on." I cried back then. I told her the pain medication was making her paranoid. I insisted Julian was my soulmate. His family adored me, and I would never need a backup plan. Now, standing on a filthy subway train, every single syllable of my mother's dying words felt like a physical knife twisting between my ribs. Laura was still rambling on the other end of the line, completely oblivious to the fact that she was actively destroying my life. "Mom said if she asks why you want to be on the paperwork, just play the whole 'we're building our future together' card. Lay it on thick. She's a total pushover. She'll cave." Laura let out a harsh, dismissive laugh. "I mean, who's gonna stop you? Her mom's dead and her dad is off playing house with his new wife in Arizona. She literally has no one else to defend her. Don't be an idiot, Julian. Mom always said you hit the jackpot when you married her. A girl with solid assets and zero family baggage. It would be a crime not to use what she has." The train suddenly slammed its brakes to pull into the next station. I stumbled hard, my hip bashing against the metal grab pole, but I barely registered the bruise. That physical impact was absolutely nothing compared to the sensation of my chest caving in on itself. Alara dropped her voice a fraction, trying to sound conspiratorial over the phone. "And what about the liquid cash? The life insurance payout from her mom? What was it, 90 grand? You need to convince her to use it as seed money for your contracting firm. Tell her it's a joint venture. She worships the ground you walk on. She'll totally hand over the check. What's the point of letting it rot in some mutual fund anyway? She married into our family. Her money is our family's money." A high-pitched ringing started up in my ears, drowning out the noise of the commuters around me. That $90,000 was the insurance payout, and my mother's entire life savings, scraped together over decades. I had never bragged about it. I hadn't breathed a word of it to anyone except Julian. I told him because spouses aren't supposed to keep financial secrets from each other. I trusted him to the point of sheer, blinding stupidity. Suddenly, a memory from half a year ago snapped into crystal clear focus. Julian had come to me, asking for 50 grand to help a friend launch a boutique architecture firm. He swore that if I pulled the money from my inheritance, the profits would belong to both of us. I had seriously considered it. Thank God my gut instincts kicked in and I ran a background check on his buddy, only to find a mountain of unpaid tax liens. I refused to write the check. Julian punished me for it. He gave me the silent treatment for 10 days, eating his dinner, staring at the wall, and locking himself in the spare room. I had actually cried to my therapist, blaming myself for being too calculating and not supporting my husband's dreams. But there was no business partner. They had been circling my money like vultures since the day we signed the marriage license. "Julian? Hello? Are you even listening to me?" Alara's sharp tone yanked me brutally back to the present. I looked up. The woman staring back at me in the dark reflection of the train doors looked like a ghost. My eyes were bloodshot, but not a single tear fell. I unglued my tongue from the roof of my mouth. "Alara?" The line went dead silent. Only the screech of the tracks filled the gap. A few seconds later, a terrified, shaking voice squeaked out. "Zinnia, why do you have his phone?" I grabbed it by accident. My voice didn't even sound like my own. It was cold, hollow, and completely detached from the wreckage of my life. "Wait, Zinnia, no, listen to me. Let me explain. I was just
joking.
My mom and I say stupid stuff like this constantly. Please, don't take it the wrong way. A bitter, jagged laugh scraped the back of my throat. A joke? The blood in my veins felt like ice water. You're joking about stealing the only home my dead mother managed to leave me? You're joking about draining her life savings? You're laughing about how I don't have any parents left to protect me, which makes me an easy target? You are blowing this entirely out of proportion. Alara's voice spiked, panicked and defensive. We didn't mean it like that. We're your family. Stop. I cut her off, my voice dropping to a dead, flat calm. Pass this message to your mother and your brother. The brownstone in Beacon Hill is mine. Not a single floorboard, not a single brick belongs to the Miller family. And the money my mother left me, I will keep it, invest it, or set it on fire in an oil drum if I feel like it. None of you get a vote. Zinnia, don't be such a selfish bitch, Alora snapped, the nice girl act dropping instantly. You've been married to my brother for 4 years. Your house is his house. Mom just wants us all on the same property. What is so twisted about that? My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles ached. What's twisted is that you never actually looked at me and saw a sister-in-law. You saw a walking trust fund. You saw an ATM. You saw an orphan you thought you could bleed dry. I ended the call. The world around me muted itself. The subway car still screeched. Commuters still pushed past me. But all I could hear was my mother's voice echoing in my skull. It is your ripcord. I hugged my leather toe tight against my ribs and stood rigid until the doors opened at my stop. As I walked up the street toward the gallery, the device in my hand started vibrating furiously. My own contact photo flashed on the screen. Julian was awake. He knew what happened. Alara must have called him in a blind panic. I just stared at the screen and let it buzz in my palm. Then the text messages started rolling in, one after another. Zinnia, pick up the phone. Alara is an idiot and she was just talking trash. Don't listen to her. I'll explain everything when you get home. I stood on the sidewalk, reading those messages over and over. If this had happened yesterday, I would have bent over backwards to believe him. I would have rationalized that Alara had no boundaries, that his mother, Beatrice, was just painfully old-fashioned, and that Julian was an innocent bystander. I would have swallowed my anger just to keep the peace. But I heard the malice in Alara's voice today. Apologies don't fix broken glass. I walked into the gallery lobby at 8:20. My hands were freezing, even with the central heating blasting. I opened my laptop in the break room, staring at the pitch deck I had stayed up until 2 in the morning to finalize. The slides blurred together. I couldn't care less about acquisition metrics right now. My brain just kept replaying Alara's sneer. She literally has no one else to defend her. My grief wasn't a tragedy to them. It was a blind spot they could exploit. Marcus, my gallery director, stopped by the coffee machine and frowned at me. Zinnia? You look terrible. Are you sick? I forced the corners of my mouth up. I'm fine. Just need caffeine. I'm ready for the 2:00 meeting with the estate lawyers. I know what's on the line. Good. Hang in there, he said, walking off. I looked back down at Julian's phone. Another text popped up. Zinnia, please, you know how Alara gets. I was going to talk to you about the brownstone, but not the way she made it sound. Staring at that pathetic excuse, a dozen tiny red flags that I had previously ignored suddenly clicked into brutal focus. I remembered Beatrice drinking wine at last year's Thanksgiving, casually mentioning that independent women ruin marriages, and that spouses need to pool all their assets if they want a family to survive. I remember Julian staring at the property tax assessment for the Beacon Hill house and muttering, "Once we have a baby, we really ought to dump this place and use the cash for a massive build in the suburbs." I remembered Alara walking through my apartment, looking at my things and scoffing. "You're so lucky, Zinnia. Your mom died, but at least you got prime real estate out of it. Nobody is ever going to just hand me a house." Back then, I thought they were just tacky. Now, the sheer venom behind those comments was undeniable. I powered the phone off and shoved it into my bag. I had a job to do. The acquisition meeting lasted 2 grueling hours. I presented the catalog, answered the lawyer's aggressive questions, defended our valuation, and smiled until my cheeks cramped. I functioned like a machine, completely masking the fact that my marriage had just been ripped to shreds. When the lead attorney finally nodded and agreed to our terms, the rest of my team let out a collective breath. Marcus looked ecstatic. I just felt hollow. I was shaking from the adrenaline crash by the time I packed up my laptop. The second I stepped out of the conference room, my personal cell, the one synced to my Mac, started ringing. It was Freya, my oldest friend. "Zinnia, where are you?" she demanded. She sounded breathless and absolutely furious.
"I'm at the gallery," I said, leaning against the cold hallway wall. "Why? What's going on?" "I'm at the cafe right down the street from your building. I just watched Julian, his mother, and Alara grab a table in the corner. I heard everything, Z. They don't think this is a misunderstanding. They are doing damage control." My stomach violently dropped. What exactly did they say? "Beatrice told Julian he needs to play the victim tonight and beg for forgiveness. And if you refuse to put him on the deed, she told him to threaten you with divorce." Freya's voice shook with rage. She actually said out loud, she's an orphan in her 30s. She's terrified of dying alone. Threaten to walk out and she'll hand over the house to make you stay. Then Alara chimed in and called you a greedy bitch for hoarding the property. A cold sweat broke out across the back of my neck. And Julian? He just sat there, Zinnia. He drank his coffee. He didn't defend you once. That was the kill shot.
Julian chewed the inside of his cheek. The silence dragged out for agonizing seconds before he finally mumbled his excuse. "I just figured, we're married, Zinnia. Assets are supposed to be joint. It just makes it easier to plan for our future." I let out a harsh, scraped-out sound that was supposed to be a laugh. "And what does that future look like, Julian? Selling my mother's house so we can buy a massive compound for your mother and Alara to live in?" Alara's face flushed a violent, blotchy red. "Don't twist my words into something ugly, Zinnia. I have a toddler. I want some stability for my kid. Is that an actual crime?" I turned my head and stared dead at her. "The crime is trying to pour the concrete for your stability over my dead mother's memory." Beatrice slammed her palm flat against the coffee table. The water glasses rattled. "You are crossing a serious line right now. When you marry into a family, you look out for that family. That brownstone is sitting completely empty. What do you possibly lose by helping your own sister-in-law?" I looked at the woman I had called my mother for the last 4 years. A wave of pure nausea washed over me. What do I lose? I lose the absolute last piece of the woman who raised me. I lose my safety net. I lose my trust in my own home. And I lose this marriage. Julian actually flinched. He took a step forward. "Zinnia, stop using the word divorce like a weapon." I didn't argue. I turned my back on them, walked straight into the master bedroom, and pulled my navy hardshell suitcase out of the closet. I had already made this decision hours ago, staring blankly at a spreadsheet in the gallery break room. It isn't a weapon, I said, rolling the bag into the hallway. It's a fact. I am leaving tonight. My lawyer will be in touch tomorrow morning. If you have any shred of basic human decency left, you won't make this a circus.
The entire living room froze the second the suitcase wheels clattered against the hardwood floor. Julian scrambled across the rug and physically blocked the front door. He dropped his voice, aiming for that soothing, reasonable tone he always used when I was upset, but the sheer panic in his eyes gave him away. Zinnia, do not blow our lives up over a bad conversation. We can shut the door and figure this out between us. I stared down at his hand resting heavily on the handle of my luggage. It was the exact same hand that had slipped a gold band onto my finger. The hand that was supposed to protect me from the rest of the world. Right now, it was just a trap. He wasn't terrified of losing me. He was terrified of watching $1 million in real estate and cash walk out the door before he could put his name on it. Take your hand off my bag, I said. Zinnia, please, just be reasonable. Take your hand off my bag, Julian. Beatrice shot up from the sofa, her voice sharp and incredibly vicious. Are you honestly walking out, dragging luggage down the hallway at 8 o'clock at night? What are the neighbors going to say? You are embarrassing us. I turned to look at her. I felt strangely calm. Your family lost its dignity the moment you sat down to scheme a way to rob an orphan, not when I packed a bag. Alara jabbed a finger in my direction. Stop acting like a martyr. Your stupid house has been collecting dust for years. Selling it to help your family is what a normal, decent person would do. You are just a calculating, greedy... Alara, I cut her off, my voice dangerously low. You have a husband. You have a job. If you want a luxury house, go work for it. Stop waiting for another woman to fund your lifestyle. Julian tried to grab my elbow to pull me back toward the bedroom, desperately trying to separate me from the pack so he could manage the situation. I'm sorry. I admit my mom and Alara took it way too far, but I never wanted to force you into anything. I just honestly thought if we co-owned the property, it would bring us closer. I laughed directly in his face. Closer? By legally taking the only thing that belongs to me and making it yours? Why is it that in this marriage, ours always means yours? Haven't I been a good wife for 4 years? I looked around the apartment. I had picked out the linen curtains, the Moroccan rug, the ceramic lamps. I had poured my entire heart into making this hollow drywall box feel like a real home. But I was the only one playing house. You only think I'm good when I am obedient, I said, looking right through him. You only act sweet when I yield to what you want. You only love me when I don't stand in the way of your family's bottomless greed. That isn't love, Julian. That is fattening up a calf for the slaughter. All the blood drained from his face. That is a horrific thing to say. Not as horrific as pointing out that my mother is dead, so I don't have anyone left to defend me. He went completely mute. That heavy, suffocating silence. I took an Uber straight to Freya's apartment in Cambridge. The second she unlocked her door, she took one look at my face and dragged me into a suffocating hug. You're safe. You got out. That is all that matters. I buried my face in her shoulder and finally let myself completely break down. Freya forced me to eat a bowl of hot ramen while I sat on her counter stool. I managed a few bites, but my throat felt completely swollen shut. Next to my bowl, my phone vibrated in a constant, relentless rhythm. Julian called. Beatrice called. Alara sent massive text blocks filled with guilt trips and victim blaming. I powered the device off and pushed it away. Freya sat across from me, her face completely serious. Tomorrow morning, I am walking into the law firm with you. I wiped my face with the back of my sleeve. Yeah, I am absolutely not doing this alone anymore. I woke up the next morning at 6,
having barely slept a wink. The gray morning light spilling through Freya's blinds hit my suitcase sitting in the corner of her guest room. It was a brutal realization. My entire adult life had just been condensed down to 3 changes of clothes and a laptop. Freya walked in and handed me a massive mug of black coffee. You don't have to put on a brave face in this apartment, but when you walk into that office, you have to be ice cold. I nodded, gripping the warm ceramic. Ice cold. If I showed even a fraction of a weakness, those vultures would... I laid the entire disaster out on the table, starting from grabbing the wrong cell phone on my kitchen island, all the way to Ilara's callous remarks and the hostage-style ambush in my living room last night. Eleanor didn't interrupt me once. She didn't offer fake sympathy. She just listened intently, making quiet, precise notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finally ran out of words, my hands were shaking slightly. Eleanor set her pen down and looked up at me. "The brownstone in Beacon Hill," she started, her tone strictly business. "Was the deed solely in your name before the date of the marriage?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "My mother bought it outright. I have the closing documents, the original deed, and all the bank transfers proving it was a direct gift to me years before the wedding took place. And the $90,000, it is sitting in a separate high-yield savings account under my name only. It was a life insurance payout combined with her life savings. I haven't touched a single dime of it. Julian's name is nowhere on that account." Eleanor gave a sharp, professional nod. "Under Massachusetts law, property acquired before the marriage or received via direct inheritance is heavily protected and considered separate non-marital property. As long as you did not commingle those funds, meaning you never used that specific account to pay off joint marital debts and you never deposited his paychecks into it, the court will view it as entirely yours. The brownstone is yours. The cash is yours. Period." I slumped back against the chair and let out a shaky breath that I felt like I had been holding in for 24 straight hours. For the first time since I stepped onto that miserable subway train yesterday morning, the crushing weight sitting on my chest finally began to lift. Julian and his family had banked on my fear, but they were about to learn exactly what happens when you corner someone who has nothing left to lose. Freya leaned forward, her elbows planting firmly on the polished mahogany desk. "What happens if he refuses to sign? What if they try to drag this out in court just to bleed her accounts dry?" Eleanor didn't blink. Her expression remained entirely neutral. "Then we take them to trial. It takes longer and it gets expensive, but the law regarding premarital assets in this state does not care about his hurt feelings or his mother's opinions." She leaned back, tapping her silver pen against the yellow notepad. "Listen to me very carefully, Zinnia. The legal fight is actually the easy part. The emotional warfare is going to be brutal. Once they realize they have absolutely no legal standing to take your property, they will pivot. They will cry, they will beg, they will play the victim, and they will use the word family like a weapon to make you feel like a monster. Do not sign a single paper without my eyes on it. Do not transfer a dime. Ignore their calls and force everything into writing." I swallowed hard, a sharp sting returning to my eyes. Eleanor's blunt warning dragged up a memory of my mother standing in our cramped galley kitchen, coughing into a paper napkin but forcing a brave smile. No matter who you fall in love with, Zinnia, you make sure you always have a roof that only you own. Leaving the law firm, I took an Uber straight to the Beacon Hill brownstone. I hadn't stepped foot inside in over 8 months. A thick layer of dust coated the original hardwood floors, and the air felt heavy and stale. But the second I turned the deadbolt and stepped into the entryway, the faint, lingering scent of my mother's lavender soap hit me. It smelled like safety. It felt like the only place in the entire world where I didn't have to shrink my personality to make someone else comfortable. I stood alone in the center of the empty living room, dropped my bag, and finally let myself sob. My phone vibrated violently against my thigh. The screen showed an unknown number, but my gut already knew who it was. I swiped to answer and immediately tapped the record button on the screen. Zinnia, where the hell are you? Julian's voice was tight, anxious, and clipped. If you have a point, make it. I've been doing some thinking. If you really want to blow up our marriage over a simple misunderstanding, I won't fight you on the divorce. But you need to sell the Beacon Hill property and cut me a check for half. I gave you 4 years of my life, Zinnia. I am not walking away from this empty-handed. A bitter, Arctic chill settled deep into my bones. You are literally trying to negotiate a severance package for a marriage? I am asking for what is legally fair. Fair is you keeping your hands off the only thing my dead mother managed to leave me. Julian went dead quiet for a long beat. When he finally spoke again, the accommodating husband mask was completely gone. His tone was hard. If you are going to be this stubborn, I am taking the gloves off. I looked over at a framed photograph of my mom sitting on the dusty windowsill. The gloves came off the second you and your family sat down to figure out how to steal my house. I hung up. I stayed in the brownstone that night. I wiped down my mother's old writing desk and set a cheap bodega bouquet of daisies in a water glass. The house was dead quiet. I could hear the faint hum of the ancient refrigerator and the distant rumble of traffic from Storrow Drive. Oddly enough, completely free of Julian and Beatrice's constant passive-aggressive commentary, I felt infinitely safer in this empty, dusty house than I ever did in my marital home. I went into the hall closet and hauled out my mother's heavy, fireproof lockbox. Inside were the original deed, the estate transfer papers, and all my bank books. I photographed every single page, backed the files up to 2 separate cloud drives, and emailed the entire folder to Eleanor. I was completely done playing the careless, trusting wife.
At exactly 9 o'clock, the intercom buzzer screamed through the quiet apartment. I checked the security camera feed. Julian was standing on the front steps. Beatrice and Alara were flanking him like personal bodyguards. They had tracked me down much faster than I anticipated. I didn't hit the release button to buzz them in. Instead, I grabbed my phone, opened the voice memo app, and walked down the 3 flights of stairs to the heavy glass lobby door. I stood inside the foyer, keeping the deadbolt locked securely in place. "What do you want?" I asked through the thick glass. Julian glared at me, his eyes quickly scanning the antique molding in the lobby like he was mentally appraising the property value. "Open the door. I want to talk like adults." Beatrice shoved her way to the front, pressing her hands against the glass. "This building is a crumbling dump anyway. You'll be lucky if a developer gives you market value for the lot. Why are you hoarding it like some greedy dragon?" I kept my face completely blank. "This is private property. Leave right now before I call the cops." Alara rolled her eyes violently. "Oh my God, calm down, you absolute psycho. He is your husband. He has a legal right to come inside." I stared right at Julian, ignoring his sister. "Do you honestly think you have a right to be here?" He avoided my gaze for a second before jutting out his chin. "I have a right to my share of the marital assets. Just agree to sell the place, Zinnia. Cut me a check for $100,000 to buy me out, and you can keep whatever is left. I will sign the divorce papers tomorrow." Nausea clawed at the back of my throat. "You say it like it's spare change. On what planet are you demanding $100,000 for 4 years of playing house?" Beatrice started screeching through the glass again. "Stop negotiating with her, Julian. If she won't pay, we will drag her through court. Listen to me, Zinnia. If you make this ugly, you are the one who will be socially ruined." Beatrice's face was flushed with rage as she continued to yell through the lobby door. "A divorced woman dragging her in-laws through the mud over a few dollars? Who is ever gonna want you after a scandal like this?" I stared at her through the smudged glass for a long time. Years ago, if Beatrice had raised her voice at me, I would have immediately shrunk away and apologized just to smooth things over. Tonight, I just felt a profound, heavy sense of pity for her pathetic,
antiquated worldview, a mindset where a woman's entire value was strictly tied to keeping a man around at any cost. "I don't need anyone to want me," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the barrier. "I just need to live in peace with what rightfully belongs to me." Julian stepped closer, pressing his face near the glass, lowering his voice into a fake, menacing register. "Zinnia, do not force my hand." I lifted my phone up so they could all see it. The recording screen glowed bright red in the dim lobby lighting. "From the second you walked up to these steps, I've been recording every single word. If you do not get off my property right now, I am calling 911 to report trespassers, and I am sending this audio file straight to my litigator." All three of them instantly froze. All the arrogant color drained completely out of Alara's face. Beatrice opened her mouth to scream something else, but Julian grabbed her tightly by the elbow and yanked her back from the door. He looked at me, his face a twisted mix of absolute rage and genuine shock. "You have really changed," he spat out. I turned my back on them and started walking up the stairs. My vision blurred with tears, but I was smiling. I hadn't changed at all. I had simply finally become the woman my mother raised me to be. Someone who loves deeply, but flat out refuses to be a doormat for parasites. The next morning, I emailed the audio file to Eleanor. 10 minutes later, her reply hit my inbox. It was exactly one word. "Excellent."
Keep a record of absolutely everything, Eleanor had instructed during our meeting. Document every single interaction moving forward. I used 2 days of paid time off to get my life organized. I printed out hard copies of every financial statement, tax return, and deed. Stacking those papers felt like laying the bricks of a fortress I was building around myself. That Thursday afternoon, I dragged Freya back to the Back Bay apartment to pack the last of my clothes and personal items. I absolutely refused to step foot in that place alone. When I unlocked the front door, the apartment was a total disaster zone. Julian's clothes were draped over the dining chairs, half-eaten takeout boxes cluttered the quartz countertops, and my boots stuck to something spilled on the hardwood. In less than a week, the place had completely reverted to its natural state, a filthy bachelor pad that I was no longer around to clean up. Julian walked out of the hallway looking completely haggard, with dark circles under his eyes. "Zinnia, are you seriously not coming back?" I didn't even look him in the eye. I just pulled out my flattened cardboard boxes and started assembling them. "I'm just here for my winter coats." He stepped into the hallway, physically blocking my path to the closet. "I talked to my mom. She and Alara promised they will never mention the brownstone ever again. Just come home. We can hit the reset button." Freya let out a loud, mocking scoff from the kitchen. "Hit the reset button so they can brainstorm a better strategy to steal her real estate next time?" Julian shot a venomous glare at her. "This is a private conversation between a husband and a wife. Back the hell off." "There is no husband and wife anymore," I cut in, my voice freezing cold. "From now on, you can direct your comments to my attorney." His face darkened instantly. "Are you honestly going to be this heartless?" I paused, looking up from my moving box. "Heartless is sitting at a cafe table, listening to your mother and sister plot how to extort your wife, and quietly sipping an iced coffee. I'm not heartless, Julian. I am just saving myself." Right at that moment, the front door swung open and Beatrice marched in. The second she spotted Freya leaning against the kitchen island, her face twisted into a massive scowl. "Did you really have to bring your little bodyguard here to cause a scene?" I calmly zipped up the canvas duffel bag containing my boots. "I have my things. I won't be coming back to this apartment. If I realize I forgot something, I will email Julian." Beatrice crossed her arms and sneered at me.
You think you know the legal system so perfectly, but let me give you a reality check. Judges do not just hand everything over to the woman anymore. When you enter a legal marriage, the husband is automatically entitled to his fair share. I looked straight at her, my voice feather light and entirely unbothered. Then let the judge decide. You do not represent the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I grabbed the straps of my bags and walked straight out the door. Julian called my name twice down the hallway, but I didn't break my stride. As I hit the lobby, my phone chimed in my pocket. It was a text from Eleanor. The petition for dissolution of marriage is fully drafted. Come into the office tomorrow morning to sign, and we will file it with the court. I read the message, my pulse hammering against my ribs. The real war was just getting started. The following morning, I sat in Eleanor's office and signed the divorce papers. As my ballpoint pen hovered over the signature line, my fingers trembled slightly. It wasn't because I missed Julian. I was mourning the 4 years of my youth that I had poured directly into a black hole. Eleanor watched me with a gentle expression. Do you need a minute? I shook my head. No, I just want this done cleanly, and I want them to touch absolutely nothing that belonged to my mother. Thankfully, to do the evil, zero contact with Eleanor. If they call, read it or not, send every single text message. If they show up at the office or your house, call it when it's me. When I walked out of the law firm, the Boston sun was blindingly bright. But for the first time in weeks, the world didn't feel heavy and dark. I called Marcus, my gallery director, and told him I was ready to dive back into my workload full-time. He listened quietly, then said, "Take whatever time you need, Zinnia. But remember, the gallery values you. We need your eye on this new collection." Those words hit me hard. I had a purpose outside of being an accommodating wife. I was a respected professional. I had friends. I owned my home. I had my own agency. That Friday evening, I stopped by Whole Foods to grab some groceries for the brownstone. As I walked down the brick-paved sidewalk toward my front steps, I spotted Alara pacing near my gate, furiously typing on her phone. The second she saw me, she charged forward like an angry bull. "Zinnia, are you completely out of your mind? You actually filed the divorce papers?" I immediately stepped back, pulled out my phone, and hit the record button, holding the device casually by my side. If you have something to say, make it extremely quick. "You are pushing my brother into a corner. He is a total wreck," she yelled, waving her hands wildly. "Mom's blood pressure is through the roof, and you are just sitting up here in your fancy historic house acting like the victim. Do you have any conscience left at all?" "My conscience," I replied in a dead, flat tone, "was never meant to fund your family's greed." Alara's face flushed a violent shade of purple. "You think hiring a shark lawyer makes you invincible? When we get to court, the judge is going to look at Julian's contributions. He was your husband for 4 years. He has legal rights. Being a husband does not give him a free pass to steal my premarital assets." Alara ground her teeth together. "If you had just sold the stupid place and given Julian a cut, this would have all blown over. If you keep playing hardball, do not blame me when I tell everyone what a selfish, ungrateful bitch you are. I will post the whole story all over Facebook. I'll make sure everyone knows you abandoned your family over a paycheck." I looked around the street. A few neighbors walking their golden retrievers were starting to stop and stare at us. A month ago, the mere threat of public embarrassment would have paralyzed me. Today, it felt like absolutely nothing. I enunciated every single syllable. "Go ahead, post it. And the second you hit publish, I will upload the audio recordings of you and your mother plotting to extort a dead woman's estate just so you could open a basement Pilates studio. I have the audio files. I have the text messages. I have eyewitnesses. If you want a public circus, Alora, I am more than happy to buy the tickets." Her jaw physically dropped. She stared at the phone glowing in my hand, all the angry color instantly draining from her cheeks. Right at that moment, Julian came jogging around the corner, totally out of breath. He grabbed his sister tightly by the arm. "Alora, stop it! Let's go!" She violently yanked her arm away. "Are you taking her side now?" Julian didn't answer her. He just looked at me. In his eyes, I saw anger, pure exhaustion, and for the very first time, actual fear. It finally clicked in his brain that I was no longer a pawn in their game. That night, Eleanor emailed me a major update. Julian had officially hired a lawyer and filed a counter-petition. They were formally asking the court to award him an equitable share of the Beacon Hill property and the $90,000 in cash, claiming he had heavily contributed to the maintenance and emotional stability of our marriage. They also accused me of abandoning the marital home. "Are you freaking out?" Freya asked over the phone later that night. "No, they are trying to build a legal case out of thin air." Eleanor called it a standard scare tactic. I spent the entire weekend doing homework for my lawyer. She needed me to comb through 3 years of bank statements. As I sat at my dining table, dragging a yellow highlighter across transaction after transaction, a horrifying reality materialized right in front of me. Rent for the Back Bay apartment, utility bills, groceries, co-pays for Beatrice's physical therapy, Julian's car insurance. I had paid for almost all of it. Meanwhile, Julian's paychecks went straight into his personal checking account. And month after month, massive cash transfers went out via Venmo directly to his mother. The memos were always vague, for mom or savings. I scanned every single damning page and sent the file straight to Eleanor. Eleanor replied to my email within 3 minutes. "This is absolute gold. You didn't just maintain financial independence, you completely subsidized his daily life while he secretly funneled marital assets to his mother. His claim for an equitable contribution just went up in smoke. See you at the courthouse." The pretrial settlement conference landed on a miserable, freezing Tuesday morning at the Suffolk County Courthouse. I walked through the heavy revolving doors wearing a tailored charcoal blazer, my hair pinned back tightly, carrying an expanding folder stuffed with hard copies of every financial record I owned. Julian was already pacing the scuffed linoleum of the waiting area with his attorney, a guy in a flashy pinstripe suit who looked entirely too pleased with himself. Beatrice and Alara were hovering near the elevator banks, banished to the public corridor because they had no legal right to be inside the actual meeting rooms within. When Beatrice spotted me walking down the hall, she loudly scoffed, crossing her arms over her chest. Look at her, hiring a shark litigator just to terrorize her own husband. Disgusting. I didn't break my stride or even glance in her direction. Eleanor simply touched my elbow and murmured, "Eyes front, Zinnia. Let the paperwork do the talking." Once we settled inside the fluorescent-lit conference room, the court-appointed mediator folded his hands on the table and asked if there was any viable path toward reconciliation. "Absolutely not," I answered without a second of hesitation. Julian looked across the table, immediately slipping into his wounded puppy routine. "I don't want this divorce. I love my wife. She has just been heavily manipulated by her friends, and she totally misunderstood my family's intentions." I stared at him, genuinely in awe of his ability to lie so smoothly in a legal setting. I nudged Eleanor under the table. Eleanor calmly set a Bluetooth speaker on the wood grain and clicked a file on her laptop. Julian's recorded voice demanding a $100,000 payout for playing house echoed off the sterile walls. That was immediately followed by the audio of Alara threatening to launch a smear campaign against me on the internet. Julian's face drained to the color of wet cement. Julian's attorney cleared his throat aggressively, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. Emotions were running high that night. My client was merely expressing his deep frustration. We are simply asking for a fair division based on his significant contributions to the household. Eleanor didn't miss a single beat. She slid a heavy stack of bound documents across the table. The Beacon Hill brownstone was purchased entirely in cash by Zinnia's late mother prior to the marriage. The deed has remained solely in my client's name. The liquid $90,000 was an insurance payout housed in an isolated account. Neither asset has ever been commingled. She pushed a second, thicker stack of highlighted spreadsheets forward. Furthermore, my client provided 3 years of exhaustive bank records proving she covered over 80% of the marital living expenses. During that exact same period, your client transferred roughly $45,000 of his personal income directly to his mother. If anyone in this room has a valid claim for the dissipation of marital assets, it is Zinnia. Eleanor leaned forward, her voice dropping to a lethal calm. But my client is willing to waive her right to chase the funds he funneled away, provided your client walks out of this marriage with exactly what he brought into it, which is absolutely nothing. The room went dead silent. The mediator looked directly at Julian's lawyer, raising a single, highly skeptical eyebrow. Julian stared a hole into the table, his hands visibly shaking against his knees. The mediator leaned back in his chair and sighed. Counselor, I strongly suggest you take your client out into the hallway and explain the harsh reality of Massachusetts property law to him before we waste a judge's valuable time on this nonsense. The conference ended abruptly, right then and there. Out in the corridor, Beatrice tried to lunge forward to yell at me, but Julian grabbed her tightly by the arm. Mom, shut up. Just stop it. Alara looked utterly terrified. I didn't stick around to watch the fallout. I walked straight to the elevators with Eleanor. The metal door slid shut, locking the Miller family out of my life for good.
3 weeks later, a family court judge officially signed our divorce decree. The ruling landed entirely in my favor. The historic brownstone and the inheritance cash were legally confirmed as my protected, non-marital property. Julian's desperate claims for an equitable share were thrown out completely. When the judge finalized the paperwork, I didn't jump up and cheer. I just felt a massive, suffocating iron door finally click shut behind me. As I walked out of the courthouse and stepped onto the busy Boston pavement, I heard footsteps jogging up behind me. Zinnia, wait. I stopped and turned around. I'm sorry, Julian breathed out, his voice cracking slightly. I really am. I looked closely at his face. This was the exact apology I had desperately craved for months. But standing here now, it meant absolutely nothing. You aren't sorry that you hurt me, Julian. You are just sorry that you lost. No, I regret it. I regret all of it. I used to regret it too, I said, my voice steady and quiet. I deeply regretted believing that shrinking my own life down would somehow make your family love me. But I don't regret it anymore. Because of you, I finally learned how to stand up and fight for my own survival. I turned my back on him for the last time and walked over to where Freya was leaning against her car, holding 2 iced coffees. The heavy gray clouds over the city had finally broken, letting the bright afternoon sun through. For the first time in almost half a decade, my chest didn't feel tight. I could actually breathe. A full year passed. I was living permanently in the Beacon Hill house. I had stripped the old wallpaper, bought a massive velvet sofa, and planted a thick row of white peonies in the window boxes, the exact flowers my mother always kept on her kitchen table. I finally got that massive promotion at the gallery. I was the senior curator now, managing my own high-stakes acquisitions, driving my own car, and dictating the terms of my own life. The gallery team respected me, and I no longer felt like a shadow behind my coworkers. Nobody called my boundaries selfish anymore. Nobody tried to weaponize the word family just to steal my safety net or manipulate me into paying for their lifestyle. One random Tuesday afternoon,
I checked my brass mailbox and found a blank, heavy stock envelope with no return address. I carried it upstairs and sliced it open. Inside was a copy of our old wedding portrait and a yellow sticky note with Julian's familiar, messy handwriting across it. I hope you are happy. I stared at the photograph for about 3 seconds. I looked at the girl in the white dress who thought she had found a safe place to land. Then, I walked into my home office and fed the entire thing directly into the paper shredder. Some memories, once they get permanently poisoned by greed and betrayal, belong in the trash. Looking back at the absolute wreckage of my late 20s, I learned a few brutal realities. First, you have to aggressively protect your assets, your legal paperwork, and your escape route, no matter how deeply you think you love the person sleeping next to you. Second, a marriage only survives if there is mutual respect, not just a one-sided demand for endless sacrifice from the wife. Third, anyone who actually cares about you will never use the concept of family to strip you of the things that rightfully belong to you. And finally, when the people you trust betray you, you do not just sit on the floor and cry about how unfair it is. You gather your evidence, you hire a ruthless lawyer, you lean hard on the friends who actually show up for you, and you fight like hell.